From the Lever's reader-supported newsroom, this is Lever Time. I'm David Sirota. Since Zoran Mamdani's shocking victory in the Democratic primary for New York City mayor, everyone seems to be looking for a lesson in his rise to political stardom. Was his ascent due to his captivating ads, his gripping social media presence, his populist messaging, or his undeniable charisma? I'd argue that those were all important, but that there's an even bigger factor almost nobody is mentioning. It's the thing that allowed all of those compelling aspects of Zoran Mamdani's campaign to reach voters in the first place. And without this one thing, it's a good bet nobody would even know who Zoran Mamdani is. That one thing I'm talking about is public money. In this next installment of our special series about the Citizens United era, we're diving into New York's system of publicly financed campaigns and how that system can be replicated across the country. Whether Zoran Mamdani wins or loses the general election, the fact that he was even able to run a competitive campaign against all that billionaire money shows exactly why oligarchs are so afraid of public financing of campaigns. It shows why public financing could be the most powerful way to combat the political corruption engulfing America in the Citizens United era. That's all coming up on today's episode of Lever Time.
Well, folks, you've done it again. We can't take any more of your money. Truly, you need to stop. Thanks to you, we've raised the maximum amount of money we can spend in this race, $8 million.
That's a campaign ad from earlier this year by the Democratic candidate for New York City mayor, Zoran Mamdani.
So we are once again asking, not for your dollars, but your time.
This is one of several ads that Mamdani has released in his dazzling mayoral campaign. And this particular message has stuck with me, probably because we rarely hear that phrase from politicians these days. Stop sending me money. In the 15 years following the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, corporate and billionaire money has poured into elections as America's campaign finance and anti-corruption laws have been gutted. In this big money free-for-all, we've become desensitized to the onslaught of fundraising from candidates all over the map. Even a political junkie like me dreads election season because it means endless text messages and emails from candidates begging for money. That's why that Zoran Mamdani ad stuck out to me. And he was able to do it because of one very overlooked factor. It's called public financing of campaigns, and it offers a very real, very here and now way that cities and states across America can start fighting corruption in the post-Citizens United world. I know. Public financing is not a very sexy name for something that has been so crucial to Mamdani's campaign. But thanks to a nearly 4-decade-old clean election system in New York City, Mamdani has received nearly $13 million of government funds to run for mayor. That's clean money. It does not come from big donors demanding legislative favors once the election is over. And while that nearly $13 million of public money that Mamdani qualified for is less than the tens of millions of dollars that oligarchs have spent to try to defeat him, it's enough to make Mamdani a real contender with a legitimate shot at winning the race. So how does public financing work in New York City?
You have to qualify. The candidate has to be running for an eligible position. So mayor, comptroller, city comptroller, public advocate, borough president, city council. So no judges and so on.
That's Karen Wharton of Citizen Action of New York, a grassroots group that was instrumental in building and expanding New York's public campaign finance system. Karen explained to me that New York City candidates need to raise a certain amount of small dollar donations from would-be constituents before they can qualify for matching funds from the government. She used an example of a candidate running for city council.
That candidate needs to raise a minimum amount of money from 75 people within that district. You meet that threshold, so now you're eligible for a match. 8-to-1 from any contributor within the city lines. And so if I were to make a donation of $10, the 8-to-1 match, $80 of public funds, plus my $10 is now equivalent to $90 to the candidate of my choice.
This matching funds program was launched in New York City in 1988 after a huge municipal corruption scandal. Here in 2025, that system allowed Zoran Mamdani, a New York State assemblyman, to become the leading mayoral candidate in total fundraising, as the majority of his money came from public funds. Without that public money matching small dollar donations, folks outside of New York might not know Mamdani's name. It's even less likely that he would have had enough resources to finance his reported $5 million television and digital ad campaign that let voters get to know him, his charisma, and his political agenda that's resonated with so many people. Karen said that's a huge plus of this financing system.
One of the results is that you find candidates and their communities are a little bit more in touch with each other. They're talking to each other a little bit more. It helps with civic engagement.
Just days before Zoran Mamdani won the Democratic primary in June this year, he joined us here on Lever Time. I asked him about the role of public financing in his campaign.
It's incredibly important because what it allows is the amplification of the voice of ordinary New Yorkers as opposed to the billionaires who have grown used to buying our elections.
The idea of publicly funded campaigns may seem new and strange, but the concept is actually more than a century old. It was first proposed at the national level by President Teddy Roosevelt in 1907. Unfortunately, Teddy Roosevelt's dream of public financing did not gain much traction amid the rampant corruption of the Gilded Age. But after the Watergate corruption scandal in the 1970s, Congress did create a program to publicly finance presidential candidates, and lawmakers also twice came really close to creating a national system of publicly financed campaigns for Congress, only to see that latter proposal vetoed by President George H.W. Bush. A decade and a half after that veto, Barack Obama in 2008 started the trend of presidential candidates opting out of that presidential public financing system altogether because they claimed its spending limits were too strict. Still, today, 14 states, including New York, and 26 localities across the country have public financing systems for their elections. They're some of the remaining systems that have been able to somewhat counteract the Citizens United ruling. Now look, I know there are some of you listening who think that corruption is so endemic that nothing can be done to stop it. But that's the opposite of the truth. Public financing already exists in some places, and it's the kind of thing that can be expanded and replicated across the country. So ahead of New York City's closely watched mayoral election, I spoke with two people who've witnessed firsthand the ways that public financing is combating corruption in politics. First up, Karen Wharton, who I invited onto the show to better understand the role that this clean elections public financing system has played in the biggest mayor's race of 2025. Do you think that public financing in the New York mayor's race has been a game changer for somebody like Zoran Mamdani? I mean, I look at it and I say, it's hard to imagine a candidate like Zoran Mamdani being able to run competitively. Win or lose, he's certainly run competitively. Mm-hmm. It's hard to imagine that without a public campaign finance system, considering how much he has antagonized billionaires, people with lots of money. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. He's able to antagonize the billionaires and lots of people with money because he's not dependent on their funding. And that's the whole point of public campaign finance. And candidates don't have to be beholden to the money class, so to speak. So I think that Zoran has run like a textbook public campaign finance campaign, if you will. He's now independent of the money class, but he's used it to build an army of volunteers. This is one of the effects of utilizing public funds. What the studies have shown is that someone who gives $50 or less is far more likely to volunteer on the campaign. The person who can write a $4,000 check is probably not trying to text bank and phone bank and door knock and do all of that. They'll write a check. And we've seen with Zoran, I believe he's had like over 40,000 small donors. His average contribution is about $98. And we've seen how many of his donors have been transformed into volunteers, and very passionate volunteers as well. I know that Andrew Cuomo, he's relying on Fix the City, his PAC, to pay for poll visibility because he did not really utilize the program as he ought to, he should have, with the small donors. He's had, like, people did donate to him and he did collect matching funds. His average donation is like maybe around $500-600, right? Average contribution. And those folks are not coming out to work on his behalf. So now he has to rely on a PAC to do that for him.
The state is now building off of what's happened in New York City to allow public campaign financing for state offices. How did that come to pass? Albany is known, frankly, as one of the most corrupt, if not the most corrupt state capital in the country. It has been. The city and the state, the home of Tammany Hall. What were the preconditions and context for the state to say, hey, look at what's going on in New York City. Let's do it at the state level? I'm sure there was opposition to it.
Oh my gosh, was there? It took the state over 20 years to pass and implement public financing program. And it began many moons ago. If you recall, there was like serious corruption at the state level. Every year, at least one or two members would be hauled off in handcuffs. Amazingly enough, it was then Governor Cuomo, that brought this program over the line. There was the Moreland Commission that, after a series of scandals, the commission was brought together to analyze and make recommendations on what to do, how to decrease the level of corruption. One of the solutions they came up with was public funding of campaigns. So after lots of weeping and gnashing of teeth, because they needed to pass the law, what basically happened was organizations such as Citizen Action, Working Families Party, many others through the Fair Election Coalition got together and worked with candidates, challengers, to be on the record as supporting this program.
And I'm just curious, what kinds of opponents were there? Was it lobbyists? Was it businesses? And what were their arguments? How did you overcome that?
All of the above. Lobbyists, incumbents, people like the status quo.
Right.
They understood the status quo and they did not want to let go of that. I think many incumbents to this day see this as a potential career-ending move for them because they're now enabling their opponents. This program helps their challengers to raise money.
Right. Incumbents don't like competitive elections.
There you have it. Yes, they don't want competition, but that's not good for our democracy. And I do believe that strong incumbents, people who are representing their communities, have absolutely nothing to fear, even if they're challenged. I think it's good for our democracy. And of course, big businesses want to continue to be able to buy off our politicians. But public campaign financing is intended to level the playing field so that people who don't have access to money can run. Fundamentally, public office ought not be only for people who are wealthy or have access to money. And public campaign financing, whether it's at the state level or the city, levels the playing field. We saw here in New York City, between the public campaign financing and ranked choice voting, for the first time in our history, we ended up with a majority female city council, the most diverse city council in our history. And there's a reason for that, right? When we add public campaign financing into the equation, because women and people of color tend to have more difficulty fundraising. So when we introduce public campaign financing, it makes it easier with the matching funds for those folks to at least stand up a viable election.
Right. So it is a doable thing, in part because of Citizen Action of New York. Karen Wharton is the Democracy Coalition Coordinator for Citizen Action of New York. Karen, thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for your work.
After the break, we head to Connecticut to hear from one state representative and her ambitious plan to unrig Congress. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Lever Time. Throughout this Money Bomb series, you've heard me talk about record-breaking campaign spending from billionaires wielding dark money. In the era of Citizens United, public financing of campaigns is a way to fight the problem, a way to counteract corporate and billionaire money's chokehold on American politics. Like New York, Connecticut has embraced public financing of campaigns. So I reached out to someone who has direct experience with that state's public financing program.
My name is Jillian Gilchrest. I am currently a state representative in the 18th District in West Hartford, Connecticut, and I am running for Congress to represent the 1st District.
I came across an article that Jillian had written last month about her experience with Connecticut's public financing system when she first decided to run for state representative against a longtime Democratic incumbent.
Back in 2018, I was working at the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I was training health professionals to screen for intimate partner violence, and I decided the time was right to run for state representative. And so I challenged a gentleman who had been in the seat for 23 years. He was considered a solid Democratic vote, but I didn't feel as though he was using the seat to push for the change that we needed.
Jillian wanted to actually make a difference on issues that matter to working families. But as a relatively unknown candidate from the nonprofit world, challenging an entrenched incumbent seemed like a steep hill for Jillian to climb, especially since she didn't have a lot of cash laying around to fund her campaign. But thanks to Connecticut's citizen election program, the money wasn't a problem. She could focus on listening to people in her community and actually earning their support alongside those small dollar donations.
It was incredibly game-changing. I mean, it made it so I could run. I knew my message was I wanted to get out there and speak to people, and so I knew I could do it if I worked hard enough. I wasn't going to be cut out because I didn't have this war chest that would have kept me from even being competitive.
Jillian is now running for Congress, so I invited her onto the show because I want to hear more about her proposal for a public financing system at the federal level. I started out by asking her how she has seen public financing affect Connecticut's state legislature during her time there.
I think it's the types of policies we're able to pass and also the types of people who are able to serve. So certainly we're not at the 50-50 I'd like to see with women and men in the legislature, and the diversity is still not at 50-50 or beyond. But we have a lot more people who represent a lot more of what Connecticut looks like than we did before we had Citizens Election Program. We've also been able to pass policies including paid family and medical leave, minimum wage, things that I don't necessarily think would have passed had it still been the same folks getting elected year after year.
Let's dig a little bit deeper on that. Connecticut has a legislature where most people are being elected with privately financed campaigns from big donors that want various things. Like, what does it look like in the counterfactual, right? Like, why do you think you wouldn't be able to necessarily have done those things in a privately financed system?
So both paid leave and minimum wage, for example, were heavily lobbied against by business interests. They thought it was going to be the end of business and, they would, there would be no workers and people would take advantage. And it was because we had been able to elect people who actually represented everyday folks who understood the importance of that policy. It still took 8 years, but we were able to push for that policy. I don't think we would have even gotten to the vote had there been folks elected by special interest groups who were beholden to the business community.
I wonder also, like in the day-to-day, if you're a candidate, you can run for election, you can challenge an incumbent like you did, and you have access to resources that don't come with the expectation of legislative favors. I suspect you're more willing to support certain things, knowing that it's harder for the big guys with big money to threaten you, or at least that they can still threaten you, but the threat of having no financial resources is somewhat defanged, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, an example would be Eversource, which is our major energy provider here in the state of Connecticut. And they take too huge a profit and continue to rise prices for consumers. And I push back against that. And they still are super well funded in that they have many lobbyists at the legislature. But I push back against them because at the end of the day, they're going to have to convince my voters not to vote for me. They're not going to be able to outspend me by paying for someone else to challenge me.
Yeah. Now, obviously, these systems don't prevent big money interests from their super PACs, their so-called independent spending, to try to demonize somebody like you or anybody else who doesn't do what they want. But it seems to me that the public financing part of this at least gives people who qualify a chance to have competitive money so that you have enough resources to answer some of those attacks and run a real campaign. I mean, to my mind, I look at the New York mayor's race as an example of, here you have a candidate that has antagonized, is not liked by the biggest of big money, like the billionaires, corporations and the like. And it's not that the public financing system in New York was able to outspend his opponents, but it was able to give him enough money to actually at least run competitively. Just talk to us about the difference between running a good idealistic campaign with a great message, but that doesn't have competitive money, versus the idea that at least you have competitive money.
So when running and you're publicly financed, I'd get people they'd say to me, okay, get to your ask, right? Or they'd say, aren't you going to ask me for money? And I'd get to say, no, I'm actually here just to speak with you. I just want to share what I'm working on. Like, people are so frustrated by the constant onslaught of financial asks from candidates who they don't even know about yet. And so you get disconnected from who you are and why you're running because it's so focused on raising money. When there is the public financing, you have a lot of time to be able to actually talk about who you are, why you're running, and learning from the people in the community what they want in an elected official.
So why do you think there aren't more public financing systems in other states and at the national level?
I think because it does create the more even playing field. And so special interest groups, billionaires and millionaires, like the system the way it is because they get the influence. To take away power from them, they don't want to do that.
I mean, does it take a corruption scandal? In reporting on this, it seems that there's a correlation between corruption gets so grotesquely bad in a certain place that the place decides, okay, you know what, we have to do something to deal with this. New York City, their public financing system came out of the mayoral corruption scandals. New York State, obviously, Albany has been one of the most corrupt places in all of American politics. Connecticut, the scandal with John Rowland, who, not surprisingly, has now been pardoned by Donald Trump. Shocker. I guess for those who are listening to this, who want to understand, like, how do they make it happen? How do they create a public financing system, for instance, in their city or their state? One question is, does some sort of massive corruption scandal need to be a precondition?
I don't think so. I think that if we can explain it in more basic terms, there would be buy-in. So connecting the dots between corporate interests and billionaires not paying taxes connected to their influence in campaigns. And if we want to change that system and how there's such economic inequality right now and people can't afford to live their daily lives, then we need to change who we elect. Well, we need to change the system that elects them. And so we need to move towards public financing. I think calling it public financing, whoosh, again, you lose people. And so just being able to explain that everybody gets the same amount of money, to run for office. It takes money out of it. You wouldn't be getting these constant calls from people. You actually could learn about your candidates, so more like talking about what the positives would be for you as a person trying to understand who's running for office. I think we can get there. We just have to really think about how we present this concept.
What would you say to people who are hearing this and will say, oh, so you're coming up with a reason we should just give more money to politicians, right? Like this is just welfare for politicians. It's just a way for politicians to feast at the public trough. What's your response to that?
I can understand where they're coming from because for so long, that's how it has felt. And that's how it still is, where it feels like politicians are benefiting off of everyday people. In Connecticut, our program is funded through unclaimed property. So it doesn't come from the everyday person. It's not a taxpayer funded system. What I'm looking at federally, we would pay for it by taxing super PACs. So if the wealthy want to invest in campaigns, you can continue to go ahead and do that, but you're going to be taxed to do it. And we're going to use that money to invest in this public financing.
So you're talking about in your congressional race, you are championing a proposal to publicly finance congressional campaigns.
Yes.
What's amazing about that whole subject is, frankly, how close we've come as a country to making that happen at various points. I mean, they've gotten really close. In 1992, both houses of Congress actually passed some form of public financing, and it was vetoed. Let's say you win, you come to Congress, you put your bill in front of Congress as a freshman House member. What do you think the response is going to be?
So I think by meeting with colleagues, meeting with advocacy organizations who support public financing and changing the way campaigns work, I think we can build momentum and we can build support. I don't think it happens day one just by introducing a bill, but I think, again, by talking about how public financing of campaigns is a critical way to change how Washington works and who we elect and how people's voices are heard and the policies they want passed would get passed, I think we have a chance of doing it.
Do you think there's any part of the Democratic coalition that perhaps would not want this? I'm thinking about unions, Emily's List, any of the groups that derive their power inside of the Democratic coalition. I just wonder if, institutionally speaking, they too feel like even if they're being outspent, they have a current seat at the current table and might not want to change the system. What do you think?
So in Connecticut, what we saw is when it happened, their power turned to people power. So the unions, the Planned Parenthoods, they now turn out folks to door knock for candidates. You can't coordinate, so they can't call me up and say, hey, how many people do you need this Saturday to door knock? Not going to happen. But they can organize their own people to go and push for candidates. And so I actually think a lot more of the grassroots, the unions, they get more power too because they have that people power. I think the main opponents would be the big corporations and these super PACs who are the ones dominating right now because it all comes down to money.
I've heard this is just a way that it'll end up penciling out better for Democrats than Republicans, and therefore it's like sort of a Democratic scheme. What do you say to that?
I completely disagree because in Connecticut, there are areas of the state that are seen as more leaning Republican, and two candidates will go in, a Democrat and a Republican, and it goes to the Republican. I mean, at the end of the day, the voters are going to decide. It just, to me, means a different type of candidate from both parties can run.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that it opens up the process to the kinds of candidates that basically are financially locked out, I think is so incredibly important. And so what I want to hear you talk about now is the difference between running for state representative in the publicly financed system and now running for Congress in a competitive Democratic primary in the privately financed system. Like that's a jarring change there.
It is jarring, and people can tell you about it, but they cannot prepare you for it. So I was told, you're going to have to spend most of your time, if not all day, on the phone raising money And I'm a hard worker. So I'm like, okay, if that's what I need to do, I'm going to do it. So you start with your Rolodex. That's what they train you to do. So I made the list, of everybody I've ever known. I don't know people who can give $7,000 right off the bat or $3,500 right off the bat. That's not chump change. That's not money that's lying around. That's a huge investment for most of the people I know. To be up against someone where 63% of their first quarter filing came from folks who have that kind of disposable income, and then an incumbent who has, a lot of PAC support. The first filings, they came out at over $1 million each. That's obscene money to me to be able to raise that quick. So, okay, it was like, let's put a pin in that. I'm focused on my campaign. I keep saying it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm raising the money at a pace I was told you should be raising it at, but that still means in this next quarter trying to get $150,000 to $200,000. And to have to reach out to people who traditionally give to campaigns rather than being able to be in the community talking to voters just doesn't feel right. So I'm doing both. I'm out in the community, I'm talking to folks, but it's a day and night. Plus, at this point, folks here in Connecticut know me as that state rep who does go out and listen. And so to have to shift gears and now be asking for money, I think feels weird for them, feels weird for me, and doesn't let us have the true conversation about why it's important to be electing different people, because now you're having to kind of fall into that same MO that other candidates do, which is hard.
I feel like part of the way corruption operates in American politics is it's not just, I got money from a donor, I did what the donor wanted. It's also, I spend most of my time talking to donors, people who can give $5,000, $7,000, which is a non-representative, to say the least, sample of what the actual public is. And if you spend a disproportionate amount of your time immersed in just talking to that small subset of the population, it can skew your view of what is actually happening in the world. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yeah, I think if you're speaking to folks, again, who have a disposable $7,000 or $3,500 at their fingertips, it's going to be hard to understand that most people are struggling to buy their groceries this month, that people's electric bills are, they're freaking out because winter's coming and they know that now the budget's going to get even tighter, that they can't pay off that medical debt. And it's not because they're not working 2 jobs and bringing in what most people would consider a decent income. I think you just aren't getting to understand the everyday lived experience of people, again, who are working like these middle class, high and upper middle class jobs, because you're talking to folks who are so above that there's this disconnect from reality, and that most people are living paycheck to paycheck, regardless of what that paycheck is. Because if you're only talking to folks who have that disposable income, that's not in their reality.
It's my view that under the Citizens United paradigm, whether we like it or not, money right now is considered constitutionally protected speech. If we are in that paradigm, that public financing of elections is like the one thing the court has said, this is okay, and it's the one thing that provides candidates at least a path they can take to put them in a position to fight the worst parts of the current corrupt system. I just wonder if you agree with that, if your experience tells you that.
I 100% agree with that. I've had a lot of people ask me about term limits, which I am open to, but until we fix this money influence in politics, we'd still be getting the same types of people elected.
Term limits seems like an attempt to like create a Band-Aid, like, oh, we have this problem where incumbents get too much money.
We have primaries. We could use the primary to move people along, but because of money, we can't do it.
The problem is the incumbents have such access to institutional corporate money that they effectively make the campaigns uncompetitive.
Yes. And if I, in my primary here when I ran for state rep, if that 23-year incumbent had been accumulating money every single year, I never would have been able to. I mean, I would have, maybe I would have, but I wouldn't have been the race I was able to do. And I still won by 150 votes. Like, you still have to try really hard,
Right.
but at least it took money out.
Right. Jillian Gilchrest is a state representative in Connecticut and also running for Congress in Connecticut. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lever Time. Check out our new book, Master Plan, The Hidden Plot to Legalize Corruption in America, where we tell the wild story of how Citizens United gutted our campaign finance system. Get the book by using the link in our show notes or visiting levernews.com/book. Lever Time is a production of The Lever. This episode was produced by Natalie Bettendorf. It was edited and mixed by Ron Doyle. Our theme music is by Nick Campbell. You can subscribe to Lever Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. For ad-free episodes, exclusive bonus content, and access to The Lever's entire archive of investigative journalism, please consider becoming a premium subscriber. Head over to levernews.com to learn more about becoming a paid subscriber or click the link in this episode's show notes. I'm David Sirota. We'll be back next week with another episode of Lever Time.